Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome Shaun Larkin to the Talent Equation podcast. Shaun, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I guess the starting point for our conversation, as it is with all our conversations that I have with on the Talent Equation, is to get you just to tell everybody who's listening in a little bit about you and your backstory and what you're doing now and what the challenges are that you're facing.
Yeah, so my primary experience in sports is baseball related. I played all through high school, college, was fortunate enough to get drafted professionally, played in the minor leagues for 6 or so years with the Cleveland Indians. From there, I got into coaching at the professional level, a couple of years in the mid-minor leagues, also did some high school coaching, college coaching, and eventually went back to the professional ranks as a hitting coach and then as a manager. And in the past 3 years, I've been in a coordinating role where I look into how we practice and develop our professional players and how we design our practices and try to be the most efficient and effective way, whether it's with the hitters or the defenders. And that's what my sole focus is on year to year now. Some of the challenges are, especially at the professional level, when you have a diverse group of coaches and players with their own opinions and set mindsets on how practice should look and what works the best, is implementing or bringing some of these new concepts of motor learning and more skill acquisition and practice design in terms of challenging our guys more, knowing when to push and pull, and really getting outside the traditional methods of practice, specifically in baseball. And it's a challenge and also reward at the same time when it starts to fall into place and coaches and players alike start, understanding the concepts and seeing it actually kind of does work and it makes sense.
So when you talk about traditional methods of coaching, kind of sort of give me a sense of there's a lot of people who are listening in who might not be that familiar with baseball. Our version over here, the ball actually bounces and everybody wears the same color. So so it's a bit of a different concept, even though the basic format of the game is the same. Somebody throws a ball, somebody hits a ball, somebody tries to stop it getting over a line, over an area. So the formats of the game broadly are the same. But what are the challenges that you face in terms of like those traditional methods that you mentioned? Yeah,
so traditionally in baseball, especially in the United States, it's how many reps can I get in to perfect a mechanic of whatever it may be. If I'm a hitter, I'm going to go in the batting cages indoors and put a ball on a tee and perfect this ideal perfect swing, whatever that may be, and just do it over and over and over and over and over again. Basically, that the practice makes perfect ideology. I can do this as many times as I possibly can, and over the course of time, I'm going to be an expert with this particular swing or mechanic I am trying to perfect in order to perform in a game. And you could do that on the same side, on the defensive side, just ground ball after ground ball after ground ball right at them. And just almost like this practice makes perfect idea, right? If I can have a nice practice performance, eventually that's going to transfer over to the games. And I'm sure all the research that I'm for sure you have done, and probably many listeners and myself have come to find that that's probably not the best way to go about it, especially if we're not mimicking the environment that we're actually playing in. So what's happened is I started digging into it more in my advanced education stuff, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I spent so many hours personally as a player in the batting cage trying to perfect this ideal mechanic or whatever I was even trying to do. And then I would go into the games, and I saw it happen with my players too that I coach. They go into the game, it didn't work, and they go right back to the environment that's isolated and repetitive. And you get caught in this vicious cycle, and it just started not to make sense to me anymore, especially now. And I think the focus is starting to shift a little bit more, and that's my job is like to, hey, coaches and players, do you recognize in the game the ball is moving? First of all, it's not stationary on a tee. It has different spins at different speeds and different arm angles from the pitchers, and just all these other variables that are coming into play that traditionally have never been even thought of. And that's what we're looking into now and trying to get better at replicating as many game situations, or at least putting our players in a position to have to make a decision more often in practice, which then correlates to the game and making, recognizing pitches and making a decision whether to swing or not to swing to allow your mechanics to take place.
So I just got to get this correct. So at professional level, you've got guys in a isolated environment hitting balls off a tee.
And I tell you what, there are Major League All-Stars, Hall of Famers who that's how they work. And we call it here at the routine. That's a real big word in the United States, especially in baseball, is routine oriented. Develop a routine, do it consistently over and over every day. And that consistency of your routine, in effect, is supposed to build your confidence and create consistency within your movements. And you'll see Major League All-Stars will have a set routine that's, hey, ball on the tee for X amount of swings, and then we'll do a front toss. It's called, so basically an underhand toss over the plate, which again is nothing, doesn't even come close to replicating an overhand pitch coming at 100 miles an hour. And they'll get their repetitions doing that, and they go into the game and they perform. So that's kind of where I get caught personally. And with our sport specifically, I think I tweet out a lot, like, is this the ideologies of these practice philosophies or mechanisms, whatever you want to call them, is it sport specific? Can it be more sport specific than not, especially when we're talking about a team sport like a baseball? You have a team, but it's also an individual sport because it's really you against, in particular baseball, it's the hitter against the ball, not against the pitcher. It's about recognizing what pitch it is, and now it's against you against the ball. Same thing on defense. Reading bounces and hops and speeds of the ball and how and when to catch it and throw it. So it's interesting to me. That's kind of where I'm at, and that's where our players are at. And I'm trying to find the balance of, is there a balance, or should there be a balance of a more traditional type practice, but also we got to do more of, decision making and some sort of stressor or game-like type practice also, especially at the developmental levels.
So I don't think, by the way, what you're describing is unique to baseball.
Right.
I think there's an awful lot of what I would describe as, I don't know, I think it's sort of repetitive, kind of comfort building activity. It's kind of just a general, I suppose, because professionals obviously can't be working at sort of maximum intensity all the time. So I think but because they've got a lot of time on task, way more than your average participant, I think they spend quite a lot of time on stuff that is seen to be, I'm still working on my game, when in actual fact, they might actually be better off just having some rest.
Right. That's something we fall into too, is guys want to keep working and working and working. And it's like, you're not going to find the answer here in this particular cage isolated environment. The answer is not here. The answer is out there during competition, and you exploring why you succeeded and why you failed. And then that should lead the practice design and which way you want to go, as opposed to same thing every day, and day in and day out, when you're trying to perfect this ideal A game, if you will, and what if that A game doesn't show up for a period of time, and that's all you've done, and that's all you have an answer for, especially in the practice environments.
So do you do most of your work in the off season, kind of working on different aspects of skill that players need to develop, and then during the competitive season, it's mostly just travel to games and travel, because you have a pretty hectic schedule, don't you? Or are you actually also trying to refine technique in the middle of the season as well?
Right, and that's where baseball, and I can only speak from my experiences in my sport, and I don't know how rugby or golf, I don't know how any other sports are, cricket, if you will, but the off season really is a time for. I'm not hands-on with our players because we have so many of them. They're dispersed throughout the country and in the world. Really, it's about strength and conditioning, getting stronger, and whatever individual need they need, whether it's mobility, flexibility, just pure strength gain and mass. It depends on what their needs are, along with some sort of mechanical adjustment that they can really hone in on to really just if they can get this particular movement more efficient, maybe it's a swing or a pitching mechanic. Throwing mechanic, whatever it may be, that this is probably the best time to do it because there are no pressures of a game to worry about. Just hone in on this one thing. As we move closer into the season, like you said, the demands of our schedule are almost ridiculous. Major League season is 162 games in probably 180 days, whatever it is. And a minor league season, 142 games in 150 days, whatever. It's basically a day, maybe two off a month in a 5-month period. And they're playing every single night. And that's what I think is unique about professional baseball is you actually play every day. In the minor leagues, trying to shift the focus of the performance tonight just in and of itself and having a minor league career versus, hey, these games that you're playing every day in the minor leagues are really practice games for you to explore yourself as a player for the ultimate level in the major league. So as many things you can be exposed to at these developmental levels, per se, should help you at the ultimate level when it really matters and the money's on the line, we're playing for a World Series, the whole thing. So in a minor league season, you're in this competitive environment every night. But you're also, before the games start, you're in a practice environment, a traditional practice environment in terms of you're not competing against somebody else. So we have a unique opportunity to kind of do both. Is prepare for the night's game against the opponent and create an environment to where it's going to replicate what we're going to see tonight or just in general in the game. We also have time, though, to isolate more specific needs for that particular player at the particular time without having to worry about replicating the game because we're going to do it tonight anyways. So there's kind of balance of both, which is very interesting. And that's at the professional level now. As you move lower, like the collegiate level, amateur levels, they're not playing every day. So how does that practice structure look like now, right? And then below the college and the high school are only playing twice a week. And then you have the younger kids who are playing maybe once a week. And what do those look like in terms of, development of a baseball player look like at particular stages of their careers is interesting to me.
So, so I mean, on the talent equation, one of the things that we're predominantly interested in is, obviously skill acquisition at all levels, because the way I describe it is that, the minute you pick up a bat, you're on a talent journey, you're learning, aren't you? So you're on a journey, who knows where you're going to stop. But the point being is that, some people think that, playing, say, Little League or something like that is just kind of like recreational. But in reality, that's where the next stars of, the next generation come from. Now, we tend to focus mostly in on around kind of teenagers. So these players at sort of 15, 16 who are now, right, hey, where have I got to go? How have I got to get to the next stage? For you guys, they're kind of getting spotted, I guess, at high school at that age. Then they're going on to college careers. Some of them get drafted immediately. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, and then you got kids from a Dominican Republic or from a Latin American country that are 16 who aren't in a high school sport. Their only experience really is either in the streets or some sort of sandlot game with their buddies, and they get recognized, and now they get thrust into a professional environment at 16. And so the guys we have, I mean, range from 16 to, I mean, the major leagues. I mean, but on a traditional American progression would be you play high school, and depending on how good you are, you either get drafted professionally, or you go to the college route and you spend between 1 to 4 years in college, and then you progress into the professional ranks through the draft.
And then when you get drafted, I'm right in thinking, aren't I, that most players, unless you're an absolute stellar all-star, most players spend some time in the minor leagues and then work their way up to the major leagues. Is that correct?
I mean, yeah, you get drafted. I could be wrong, but I can't recollect anyone who got drafted out of the draft and then immediately went to the major leagues. There's some sort of time spent in the minor leagues. Now, that time frame obviously changes for everybody, but you're introduced into the minor league system after the draft, and then your path to the major leagues. Oh, who knows? It changes for everybody based on a lot of things. It's not like the NFL or the NBA where all those guys are drafted and they go right to the top of the food chain. Baseball is a little bit different.
And so you'll have at the Dodgers. So you'll have essentially, I don't know how many 200 odd players on your roster, all playing in most of whom are playing in the minor leagues, and then a small core of whatever it is playing. And does that rotate out? So if somebody's having a really shocking season in your major league team, do they rotate back out to the minor leagues and then other guys come in, or does it work that way?
Yeah, at the major league level, it's a 25-man roster, active roster. Without getting too deep into it, it's basically your team's 25 players at any given time that are available to play. If you have, your best players stay there, and we're always trying to find ways to get better at that level. And if there's guys at the minor league level who are performing that could help us at the major league level, those guys will go up. And it's usually who's performing and who's not. If you're not and somebody else below you is, depending on the situation now and contracts and money and all that stuff, there may be a switch in and out, but it's mostly on the pitching side that you'll see it happen, just because the availability of the arms and wear and tear and rest is where you see the most movement in the pitching. The position players, not as much movement, just based on a lot of different things. Whether there's not, the guys in the minor leagues just aren't ready to come up and actually perform and help at the level that you already have of a player, say. So the movement, and it depends on organization and what their philosophies are.
Right.
But at the lower minor leagues, lower mid-range minor league levels, that you'll see a lot of movement within those levels, up and downs. But in terms of AAA or minor leagues to the major leagues, it's a big jump, and those guys got to be ready, and everyone in their decision-making process needs to believe that the person coming up, the player movement from the major leagues, is going to have an impact to help us win this game tonight, whenever his number is called upon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the player coming up from the minor leagues and performing well in the major leagues is more the exception than the rule.
Yeah. It's tough.
So
very rarely do you see it come up and make a major impact. It's unique.
It's always struck me, though, that that seems an odd thing, given that the expenditure required to keep a roster of 200 odd players on, obviously the salaries are different and everything else, but then if that's not in order to feed your major league team, it would, if I was, say, a GM, it would be, for me, I would think, right, I'm going to make those minor league teams as they're going to be like intensive skill acquisition spaces, whereby those players are training so hard and using the games to really craft their skill, so that as many as possible, if called upon, could perform in that major league side. Because then you would be, well, for me, like, you get injury, you've got somebody ready-made to replace. You're not scrapping around trying to recruit somebody in from another team or whatever it might be. It just struck me, seems to make a logical sense, but you're saying it didn't quite work that way.
Then that's the goal. I mean, you want to maximize all your assets, right? Just like anything else, you want to maximize and try to create value at the margins, and that's kind of what we're trying to do through our practice ideology and methods. Like, how do we maximize as many of these players as possible? Traditionally in baseball, it was like, hey, our high draft picks and our the guys with the most amount of money that we gave to sign with us our top prospects are going to get the most attention, and everybody else just kind of fills out the roster. Just so those particular players can play the game.
Yeah.
We need more players, and everyone else was kind of like, they're just part of the team. Well, now it's starting to shift to like, how can we maximize everybody? I mean, it sounds like duh, but it hasn't always been that way. So you're seeing this more holistic approach, developing the person, the player, fundamentally, mechanically, mentally, nutrition, all this stuff. How do we maximize at the margins, right? So whether it's going to help us at the major league level with that particular player, or can we use a particular player as a trading chip to get the piece we need at the major league level? And again, that's where the path for these players is so different. You never know how you're going to get there or how you're going to be used. Our job in player development is to not worry about that. Our job is to develop, let other people make decisions on what happens. But how can we produce as many players as possible to be ready at the higher levels for whatever the need is at the time?
When I was working in player development at England Rugby, our goal was to create an oversupply of talent. Mm-hmm. So that it's like for the national coach, it's the hardest, or like the national age group under 18 coach, they have the hardest job possible to select because there's so many players to select from. So it becomes down to fine margins. Because at one point, the team kind of picked itself. At international level, I just don't think when you've got the resources and the player base that you have, it can never be the case that the team picks itself. I think they should be fighting tooth and nail for their.
And that's the draft too, right? So we have our scouts who are out there scouring the country and the world for the players, the best players to sign. And we have our list of players that we want, but there's also 29 other teams that want those players too. And no matter how bad I want Stu, well, the Astros just took him, and now we got to go to the next, and it just kind of works its way down and it shuffles down. And obviously, as you get deeper into rounds and as the best players start going off the top, that the quality of player starts to funnel down. Now it's up to us to okay, here's what we got, and how can we maximize what they have? And that's where practice environments are so important on individualizing the setting for each individual player. And another thing that baseball has traditionally done is structure days that are the exact same for everybody.
Right.
And
yeah,
that to me has been something that now, for sure, looking back, makes zero sense. We have 15 or 13 to 14 position players all doing the exact same thing every single day. Now, how is that benefiting the individual player on any given day? Is probably a really good question to be asking.
Yeah. So
that's kind of my job, to educate the coaches and try to act as a resource as best as I can to identify some of these things on a day-to-day basis at the affiliate level, and hope we can maximize those environments and also individualize the best we can given the time constraints, given the field. I mean, unlike other sports, we only have a set amount of time on the field because you got to share it with somebody. You can't cut the field in half and both teams are going. It's one team gets the field for an hour and a half, and the next team goes and they get a chance. So how you structure those days takes some thought and energy and effort. And in the past, it hasn't. The days roll it out there and get through their time.
It strikes me that your role sounds to me like I've heard there's a lady at Barcelona called Joan Villa-Bosch, who is described as the director of methodology. So it strikes me your role is a bit like that, because you're kind of challenging coaches to make sure that they're doing the best possible job with the players. You're also identifying some of the needs of the players and trying to shape and structure training for them and all those sorts of things on a much more individualized basis. So it very much, you're challenging the way you do things on a daily basis. Is that accurate?
100%. And it's more the coaches than the players. You want to explain why to the players. Here's what you're about to get into in our system. You're going to get challenged, and here are some things that we think are important. So when you go through these practice settings, it may look different than you have experienced in the past, whether your college team or your high school team or another organization. It's going to look different.
Yeah.
But here's why. I give them all the research and all the stuff in terms of why we're doing, what we're going to do and why we're doing it. And then again, challenging the coaches on the same thing. Not only the what and why, but then the how. I think a lot of the information on the practice variability and, the constraints that are, all these different things are out there now. Everyone kind of, not everyone, but a lot of people are more aware of the what and the why. Now the challenge becomes how. And that's kind of where I come into play. My role is here's how. My job is to digest all the information that's out there, from all the research and all the, the studies. And then how does that apply to us in baseball? Not only in terms of the skill transfer and all that, but also just in the environments that we are constrained by, whether it's, time constraints or field constraints or whatever it may be. And that is where my role is. And it's a lot of fun. Like you said, there are some challenges. There are guys like you and I that are really excited and energized about some of the research that's out there and that what we believe in, isn't always accepted as easily as you would think it would be, in a sporting environment, especially with coaches who've had success or perceived success with the way they do things already. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because for me, as a coach, I don't know, but it sounds to me like you're similar to me in the sense of I'm always seeking out and looking for new approaches, new methods, and all that sort of stuff. And when I stumbled across, I say stumbled, I mean, I think all of my coaching career, I have been trying to work in a constraints-led approach. It's only in the last 5 years when I actually found out that it was a thing. Basically, I was training people in the way I like to be trained, which was to, use play, use games, kind of learn through that. I heard a famous hockey coach called Rick Charlesworth, who won multiple gold medals, Australian hockey coach. He talked about designer games. I was like, that sounds interesting. I like the sound of that. And then I heard about teaching games for understanding. I like the sound of that. That's okay. And I was playing around with it, but this was all before everything came available through the internet and everything else, and speaking to yourself and other different people. So I sort of feel like it's sort of come back to me now, and now I've got something I can hold my hand, hang my hat onto, and sort of say, there's something to play with here. But I still feel as if I'm at the, kind of the start, not even almost like still at the early stages of the journey. I'm still in the kind of the foothills of the journey up the mountain. There's a lot of different routes to take, and there's lots of different stumbles to have, but I still think but that's for me is part of the joy of it.
Oh, absolutely. Like I'm by far I'm not an expert by any means. The language I use when I describe some of these terms is not as I hate to say complicated as some other experts may explain these things. I'm definitely a layman when it comes to it. And like you, it's funny when I start coming across different terms. It's like, oh, yeah, that's what I did with my buddies at the schoolyard. We just created our own games and we figured it out, quote unquote, right? And then, I started thinking about some of the older coaches, especially in baseball, who are renowned for being really, really good. There's select groups of these coaches, older guys and then you kind of watch how they run a practice, and all they're doing is creating this variance and these variabilities and challenges and constraints, and they're just ahead of it. They just have a name for it. This is how they practice. I'm just trying to replicate the game. And it's like, oh, these guys are the best coaches. Well, yeah, because they're doing it probably the right way or more efficient way. Now we have the research to back it up, or the research is now starting to be more exposed through social media and access, really, I think what it comes down to. But like you said, daily, I'm challenging my own thoughts. I'm challenging other people's thoughts and how it relates to our sport, and constantly learning from, people way smarter than I am on the subject, and then trying to piece that together with baseball and our players. And it's a lot of fun, and there's so much to get into. And I think what people fall into the trap is they're trying to find the right way. And I don't know if that's the right way to go about it. I don't know. Is there a right way, or is there just a more efficient, maybe a better way for the given situation and player. And I think that's where, at least my goal is not to have all the answers. I like to raise questions and conversations, and I think that's where most of the learning comes from anyways, and trying to replicate this. I mean, instead of taking the research and trying to replicate what it says in my environment or any environment, that's the same as block practice anyways, right? You're trying to replicate the same thing over and over. Trying to get as much information as possible and create as many discussions, and trial and error too on the coaching side, right? I mean, you go about it, and just like we ask our players to do, get uncomfortable, and you're going to make mistakes. I think coaches should probably start doing the same things, as long as it's safe for the player. Don't want to injure anybody, but I think the healthy practice is to continually find more efficient, maybe better ways.
Yeah,
I think
I think you've touched on a couple of things there that I think are really, really worth just pulling out. I think, which is, I think with what you described right at the start of the show, which was around traditional coaching methods, there is a right way, and I think with a lot of coach education, there is a right way, and if you don't do it the right way, you don't pass. So you don't get your qualification. Now, in the UK, we've got this fairly extensive tradition of qualification-based coach education, and I know in the US it depends a bit more on your federation and your sport, and there's a lot of different routes into coaching. But certainly in the UK, there's a right way to coach, and if you don't do it the right way, you are. It's not that you failed. The terminology is you are not yet competent. Which is just another word for fail as far as I'm concerned. Right. But anyway, interesting.
That's got to be a great feeling that for someone to tell you you're not competent to be a coach.
I'd rather they just said, no, you failed. I just don't want to be called I'm not competent. Anyway, so and interestingly enough, I mean, so in that process there is this kind of right way, and I think often, and this is one of the counterintuitive things about working in this, for one, whether you say constraints-led, ecological kind of approach. For me, one of the things I think most people really struggle with is there isn't a right way, and there's always ways of making every single session better. Now, for me, that's fantastic. It's hugely dynamic. Anybody could come along and say, do you know what? If we did this, that would be better. Let's do it that way. Those are the little moments of magic that I love, because I love the fact that you've got this kind of endless array of variables that you can tweak and dial in, and just to find that perfect blend, it's like creating a perfect recipe, and then you add a new ingredient. Oh, wow, that's even better now, and let's do it that way. Whereas the other way, the traditional way, which is, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, it's very sequential, very linear. It's like following a recipe. Yeah, I'm going to produce the same dish every single time. It's going to taste good. Everybody's going to have a nice time. And people really, I want that. I want the comfort of that, because I don't want the scenarios where I create a dish that nobody wants to eat.
Right.
So so a lot of people get really uncomfortable with this idea that actually it isn't you're going to start with a series of ingredients. You're going to kind of put them in a blender, and out's going to pop sometimes some magic, and sometimes maybe not quite as good. And people aren't very comfortable with that approach. And I think it's once you get open to the idea that you're never going to have it right, and every session you do, you're going to critically evaluate, and you're going to ask people questions, and you're going to make it that little bit better each time, you're really on the journey then. You really know where you're going, but a lot of people find it hard to get to that space in the first place.
Very hard. I mean, especially, it's that practice performance that makes people feel comfortable, right? If my athlete is performing well in practice, he must be listening to what I'm saying, which means I know what I'm talking about because he's performing right now.
Yeah.
I feel good, he feels good, and okay, everything must be good. Once it starts to go a little bit sideways, the practice starts going a little ugly, and he is kind of trying what I'm saying, but it's going the other way. I must not be a good coach anymore. Let's just go back to regular so he performs better than the practice now. And that's kind of where we get stuck in that trap, Whoa, what are you saying? We created an environment where they fail? Oh, no. Because now it's a reflection on me as a coach, right? It's more of a mentality that we're moving past and understanding it's okay. That's the art of coaching, knowing to push and pull, and how do I create one environment for this player, and what what does that look like? It should be different from player B. They shouldn't look the exact same because it's totally two different people and skill sets and abilities and goals, and that should make you more uncomfortable. Why am I making a gourmet steak for a vegetarian right now? That should make you uncomfortable, as opposed to making sure I'm creating the correct dish for each person. Now I'm comfortable because at least I know I'm honing on this person's specific needs and wants and desires. That would make me feel comfortable, and it does. Knowing that when we're out there doing some of our activities, I'm okay with like, okay, that didn't go very well. What we got? Somebody else help me out here, because there are no master. The idea of a master coach, to me, that all that means is someone who is able to identify environments and create environments. That's a master coach to me, rather than someone who knows these technical skills that are perfect. Like, are they perfect? Who's to say? To me, the master coach is the one who is able to identify that this environment or this practice session needs to change for this particular player. And it's got to be different from this player also. To me, that's a master coach. Understanding situations and knowing when to pull back and to push and, manipulate practice settings for the need at that particular time, at that moment, right now, in relation to where we're trying to go. That's a master coach. If there even is one, but that would be more the idea of not always having the answers. I think, the insecurity of some coaches to say, I don't know, is a problem. Like, it's okay to say you don't know. And I think that players and athletes really respond well to that vulnerability of a coach to say, I don't know. Let's get through this together. As a coach, I may learn from you. And the more I've let my guard personally, the more I've let my guard down in that regard and just rely on the athletes to discuss amongst themselves while I'm just kind of there, helps me help the player down the road from that conversation, not even saying anything. And I think there's value to that, especially when designing practice.
And I think the thing about that, and it's actually another point that you touch on there, I think, is that I do think there is genuine fear of coaches, because if they're not in control of the knowledge flow, then the fear is that A, they won't be perceived as knowledgeable and therefore won't be perceived as a good coach, because apparently good coaches have to be knowledgeable. And then the second thing is, and by the way, I'm not saying you don't have to be knowledgeable, but the second thing is that they're fearful that the player will begin to doubt them, to doubt their, and so that's one of the reasons I think so many coaches are desperate to hold on to the imbalance of power in terms of one has knowledge, one doesn't have knowledge, one is reliant on the other for knowledge, and that knowledge will either make them better or it won't make them better. And that balance, of that dynamic balance, is there. Now, when you shift away from this idea of, kind of leadership through a power dynamic towards what I call servant leadership, whereby, you're there to serve. So the player needs to basically say, right, to you almost, this is my issue, this is my problem, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. And and then what we can do is we can sort of essentially co-create the solutions. I'll sit with a player and let's co-create the solution. Now, for me, that's a really powerful learning model. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. Sometimes it's a bit more challenging. But the player will value that over a period of time way, way more than just being told something, because that's basically like a Band-Aid.
Right.
And you don't want to give Band-Aids. You want to actually kind of help them cure themselves.
Right. I mean, what you just hit on is, it creates an ownership for themselves. They feel like they're part of the process and part of their own career, and ultimately that's what it's about. Like, the onus is on the player for their own career. Coaches are resources of information and to create environments for you to explore what you want to do. What is it that you're trying to do? Let me try to help you get there through these environments I create, through some some observations, and my observation feedback was maybe from some. From my history, from my experience, what I know of this particular mechanic where you're trying to work on. What do you think? What do you feel? What are you trying to do? I think sometimes a player is trying to do one thing and a coach is going a different path, and that's where this battle happens. Like, you need to do this without even asking the player what he's even trying to do.
Yeah.
We start coaching to what we want to see as opposed to what that player is trying to do. And that's where you start seeing that distrust, these non-functional practice environments, and it kind of goes haywire. And you have that split, in that relationship is now, it's broken and it's hard to get back. It's really hard to get back.
But that's interestingly a feature, I think, of quite a lot. I mean, there is a misunderstanding about what coaching is. So so both players and a lot of coaches assume that coaching is I tell you what to do. That's what most people think it is. I'm just going to tell you what to do. You don't know what to do. I do. I'm going to tell you what to do. And the assumption is that if I tell you what to do, well, it's magic from then on. Oh, I didn't realize that was what I was supposed to do. Now you've told me. Brilliant. I'll just go on and do it. And the assumption, there's quite a big gap between knowing and doing. In fact, there's a gigantic chasm.
Right. It's funny. At the professional level, I've heard younger players say, when I got to the professional level, it's a lot different than I expected. And I was like, okay, why? And I thought it was going to be harder. I thought you guys would be tougher on me. I thought you were going to tell me more. Because they're so used to this, I'd say amateur coaching or just this egotistical type of coaching. They're used to it. They get yelled at. They don't perform well. They get yelled at. They get benched. They have to run. And they get into a more professional environment, especially in baseball. We have time, a developmental process. And, with our approach, it's okay. We're trying to create these environments for you to fail. It's okay.
Yeah.
And that you see a lot of times these younger players have a really, really hard time asking why, acknowledging the fact that they don't feel something particularly well, or they don't really know where they want to go yet at the lower levels of minor league baseball. And that's okay too. And that's part of the process of our development and our skill acquisition and transfer, is like understanding that it's okay for you guys to explore for yourselves now. We're going to create the environment, and we put a lot on the player to decide on what they're trying to do, how they want to try to do it, and what they think they're trying to do. And now the coaches are resources. And I would think that's a sound way to go about it. But like you said, the challenge is getting past. We have a hard time with our young players just acknowledging that they have a say. Our younger players sometimes like, oh man, this is cool. And then now that you have this little gap of time to they don't really know what to say or do because they never had to do it.
Yeah.
Similar, and this goes right into just how you practice and getting in the game. Like you practice one thing over and over and over, and then you get in the game and it's not like that. What do you do?
Yeah.
So
I've definitely experienced that as well. You have that kind of, those crickets moments when you pose a question, and I've got a group of players because I work in a team dynamic, and then there's just this silence.
Right.
It's like the first time you do it, it's pretty hard not to want to fill the silence and step in there and then ask another question or something like that. But what I've learned to do over time is to just literally stand there. And if we have to stand there for 2 minutes, I'll stand there for 2 minutes, and then I'll say, "Oh, nothing. Okay, let's go back in then." And then the next time they come in, I'll stand there, and eventually they begin to pipe up, and then they realise that actually this is their space to talk.
Right. Hey, 2 minutes in relative time, is not that long, but when you're sitting there for 2 minutes in silence, that's a long time. It can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah. I just have this kind of funny smile on my face, just looking around.
Just to make it a little more awkward, yeah. That's great.
I'm a bit mean, I think. I shouldn't do it that way. So listen, we need to get into some of the detail of this, because I think we're sort of skirting around the edges. You and I guess what the genesis of this conversation sort of stemmed from, as usual. We were having a good old conversation on Twitter. So I'm kind of interested just to sort of maybe, if you could sort of share some of the discussions that we were having and kind of get into some of the topics, and then maybe we can sort of throw around some of these concepts, because I know that a lot of people who are listening in really like to get into the detail.
Of course. I think we were talking about the swing. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
trying to picture. And how do we practice it? Let's see here. This was talking about. We and I had a bunch of different conversations.
There was all sorts of threads, wasn't there? Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about the swing and developing a swing, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it here.
So if I remember correctly, I think one of the things you were talking about was this kind of approach around, should you be like working towards a particular swing, or are you looking at kind of reacting to a ball and all these sorts of different things? We're really throwing around some good concepts in there.
Yes. So I think, so you're working on the mechanic of a swing and making your swing the most ideal, right? Or should you be working on the reaction and decision-making part of it? Because a beautiful swing, you have the most mechanically sound swing, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But are you able to recognize the pitch that's coming in? Because that's the most important thing. Hey, nice swing, you swung at bad pitches, or you took a good pitch and you didn't swing.
That's right.
It's pointless to have a nice swing then. And I think that's where in baseball we fall in the trap of trying to find this ideal swing when, what's that even mean? You hear players go, is that right? How'd that look? Well, does it matter how it looks? Did you optimize your swing? Did you hit the ball hard? Did you swing at the right pitch? I have over the course of my career, I have a lot of hitters like, what's wrong with my swing? Well, your swing broke down because you swung at a ball that bounced in the dirt. Like, what do you want me to tell you? You took two pitches right down the middle, and then you swung one over your head. Like, you didn't give a chance for your swing to work because you didn't swing at the right pitch. And I try to find this ideal swing. Again, that's where the T drills, like, put the ball on the tee in this perfect swing. Okay, that's great if the pitch is right there.
Yeah.
But what happens when it's not right there? Is there some sort of adjustability? Is there some sort of, does your swing allow you to put the barrel on the ball in different areas of the hitting zone? That's where it becomes really interesting to me. What are we trying to practice? What are we trying to be masters at? Are we trying to be masters at a mechanic? Like, great. Or are we trying to be masters at solving problems? And I think being a master at solving problems and having adjustability within the game, I don't care what sport it is, especially baseball, am I able to recognize pitches? Am I able to recognize a pitch and put the barrel on it in different locations consistently? I want to be a master at that, rather than being a master at one swing in one area in one path, to where if it happens to be there, I'm good. But if not, I'm probably not going to be very, very optimal. And that's the difference.
I think it's interesting. There's a lot of parallels. I think, particularly hitting. I think there's a lot of parallels with golf.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of, I think golf has over a long period of time become very, very focused on the movement.
Mm-hmm.
The swing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at like all the books written on golf or all the articles written on golf, there is just, we're talking millions and millions of hours of reading on the golf swing. And there are all these different approaches to a movement, which is ostensibly about taking an implement, moving it through space to impact with a ball that doesn't move. Now, the only parallel with, the only difference with baseball is the ball is moving at very, very high velocity, and often moving with different patterns in the air, isn't it? It's curving, it's dipping, it's at speed. Now, the thing for me is that in a game like golf, you would think, wouldn't you, that there is room for a more mechanistic approach to learning the game, because the ball doesn't move. Mm-hmm. So therefore, there's nothing to react to.
Right.
But actually, nothing could be further from the truth. It's not a closed skill.
No.
People think it is, because it's in principle they think but there's so many other variables. There's the lay of the land. There's the weather. There's the target you're aiming at. There's the pressure of the context. There's the shot you're trying to take on. There's the spin you're trying to generate. There's an infinite number of variables that you must be able to begin to dial into. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting is the most skilled performers in a golfing context, the most skilled performers are the ones that are able to essentially make decisions based on those variables kind of in the moment. Because what they found is the idea that a human being is like a machine, and if you repeat the action over and over and over enough times, that it will become so repeatable that you will never ever make an impact error, is completely flawed. There's always going to be a micro movement in your swing that is going to cause a errant shot. And the skill often is being able to react to that micro variable and readjust.
Right.
The most skillful performers are able to do that. And I think that probably applies in a baseball context ever more so, because there's so many other variables as well.
There's no doubt. Like you said, I mean, you're trying to repeat a swing, which probably is virtually impossible to replicate the swing exactly. Now, there are resemblances and they're similar. Like after you mentioned, there's similar movements, but they're not the same, which inevitably changes everything. You know, and you see guys who look like they take a swing that looks similar to their normal swing and they swing and miss.
Yeah.
And 2 pitches later, they take this similar swing and they hammer it. Like, you know, they hit a home run or whatever it may be. It's like, well, what happened?
Yeah.
Swing a curveball before and swing at the fastball this time. I don't know. There's so many different things that go into it. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to perfect something that's not even going to be perfected.
Yeah.
I would rather try to be an expert at pitch recognition, understanding what my strengths and weaknesses are, and execute those as best as I can.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to have one particular, you know, aesthetically pleasing swing, say. And I keep going back to like, great, hey, nice swing. Either you didn't swing at the strike or you swing at bad pitches.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a combination of both, right? Like being able to recognize pitches and being like, oh, okay. It's nearly impossible, I think, as a hitter, and when you're facing high velocity, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to use this swing this time. No, and there's some sort of like this reaction to it, but those reactions only happen if you can do it over and over in terms of decision making. Right? You got to make these decisions consistently. Practicing decisions, you probably get better at making decisions.
Yes.
It's kind of like, well, you get good at whatever you practice at. Like you can practice your swing, you can have that swing over and over, and you're going to be good with that swing. Your swing is going to look pretty good on that particular drill.
Yeah.
You know, this rote learning type of idea of like, eventually these guys are going to get good at drills. They're good athletes. They're going to get good at the drill. Doesn't mean they're a better hitter, and it doesn't mean they're going to perform in the game tonight.
Yeah.
They memorize the drill. Good for them. Good for you as a coach. Like, great. Everyone feels good. But how is he going to make a decision in the game if he's never made decisions?
Yeah. I think
that's where our goal is, right? Is how can we create experts in decision making and allowing our athletes to be comfortable in uncomfortable positions. Be like, okay, I've been in this, maybe not this exact situation with this pitcher, but I've been in an environment where I'm not as comfortable, and I gotta go to my B and C strategy right here. I guess because I perceive this as being tougher. Okay, I have an answer for that, and it looks like this.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're looking to do. Like it's hard to replicate anything. Like a major league at bat, I can't replicate that with our minor league hitters. You can't replicate facing the elite pitchers in the major leagues, the minor league level with a machine. You just can't do it. So what you're trying to do is replicate the perception of it being tough, or the perception of, this is uncomfortable. What am I going to do now? Because my beautiful, aesthetically pleasing swing may not work right now.
Yeah.
I got to have a B, C, D option here to go to.
I get that.
It's just a mental component. You know, who knows? I don't know.
I get that. I get that. That there are certain probably mechanics of swinging a baseball bat that can produce more velocity or less velocity, and therefore you want to develop maximum velocity to send the ball as far as you want to go. I get that, but for me, that's kind of like a fundamental that you would work on when you were younger. You would develop hitting velocity as a younger player. By the time they reach the professional ranks, in my mind, I think you're exactly right. This is what I would call the tactical element of baseball. So they're making decisions, firstly about whether to swing or not.
Right.
And then secondly, after that, they're making decisions around, like you say, almost like, right, well, how is this ball arriving at me? There's a really interesting some research by a guy called Bruce Abernathy, who over in Australia, who did research looking at the gaze patterns of tennis players. And basically, they worked out that the tennis serve, the returner, actually, the human eye hasn't got time to react to the tennis ball because it's coming at 140 odd miles an hour.
Right.
So what they're actually doing is they are basically they're anticipating where the ball's going to go based on the movement cues of the server, and also based on the a little bit at the impact. There's that kind of so they're essentially getting like a head start on where the ball's going to go.
Right.
And once they get a read, they kind of know where it's going, and then they're getting there. And I imagine in baseball it's very similar, because obviously the speed at which the ball is arriving and the time at which you've got to make a decision is really, really small.
It's a fraction of a second. Yeah. So part of that is having, scatter reports are huge. Like, what does this pitcher, if I'm ahead, what does this pitcher feature? His velocities, and what pitches does he throw? Okay. Within that, what does he throw most often? What do these particular pitches look like? What's their action? Are they sinking? Are they breaking? Are they cutting? Is it changeup? So what does he do? Okay. Now I can formulate some sort of a plan against him to say, okay, here's what I'm looking for. I can anticipate this. I'm going to anticipate a fastball coming, and hopefully it puts you on in better time, right? To be on time to get your best swing off in a particular zone. So that plan and approach is a major part of a major league hitter's approach to hitting in that game against a pitcher. It's like, what does he throw? How am I going to attack him based on what I think is going to happen right now? And then you go from there. And now it's read and react again. Now I got when I see it and I have this fraction of a second to make a decision, to swing or not swing, and I go. And that's where the elite pitchers are so tough to hit, because their stuff is so good and it's deceptive, and it's almost like flipping a coin for some of those hitters. Like, I think I'm going to guess it's out here somewhere, and if it is, I have a chance, and if not, see ya. And that's why you see a lot of hitters like just take pitches that look good to hit, and they take them, and everyone's like, "What are you looking at?" It's like, well, I wasn't looking for that pitch, and I have no time to even react to that because I wasn't looking for that. Or I'm looking for a fastball, and the spin's so tight you can't tell it's a cutter or a slider, and you miss by 3 feet, and everyone, what are you swinging at? It's like, well, it looked like the pitch I wanted to hit, and it wasn't. And that's baseball, right? That's the fun of the game. That's what makes it so tough and so hard, and that's why I think that's the importance of practicing perception and practicing decision making, and under stress and speed variations are more important than trying to perfect this perfect swing. In my opinion, it makes sense to me.
How do you go about training that then? So what are the approaches that you've adopted so far? What are the things that you're playing around with to be able to get the player, the hitter dialed into, because for me it feels to me like, if you've got somebody who's got kind of like a 3 feet box of missing, because they're just not recognizing pitches early enough, and you can start to narrow that down a little bit more, then that's kind of the job, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you want to decrease the amount of balls you swing and miss that are bad pitches. You want to corner the pitcher into an area that you want him, and when it gets there, you don't miss it. And that's the elite player, the guys who are able to execute their plan and approach against that pitcher. They zone these guys in, and when it's there, they don't miss. They hit it hard. And also they have a swing that is a little bit more adjustable, and they can cover more areas of the zone. So that's where the mechanics do come into play a little bit. Does your swing mechanic allow you to cover more than one area of a zone? If not, there may be a mechanical adjustment you can go work on, right? And then you box it up, you block it, and then you start to challenge it, right? And then you kind of this interplay between this block and random variation, and you challenge it, and it's back and forth always, and you're constantly getting challenged in the game. You're testing the game every night. So, like I said, it's hard to replicate an actual pitcher throwing from 60 feet 6 inches, throwing multiple pitches, unless you actually are doing it in practice. Again, we're fortunate in baseball where we play every night. So if you can frame those games as practice games, which is hard to do because you got to perform or you get relieved. If you can frame it in a practice setting, those are the best reps you're going to get. Yeah. Now, we're talking about a traditional practice setting. It's hard. So, use machines to beat, velocity of machines with a long fastball and ramp it up. And it's simulating a hard fastball. okay, and you hit against it, and you play with your swing, and what do you need to do to get your best swing off or to get the barrel on the ball?
Yeah.
We have, on those machines, we can make it curve, we can make it change, we can make it sink and cut. But inevitably, all those sessions become blocked anyway. Like the hitter knows what's coming. So there is a challenge. There's some really cool stuff out there right now. The virtual reality stuff, which I think is outside the actual competition in a game. How best can you do it other than some sort of virtual reality? I think that would be the best way. But right now it's just too expensive and probably not feasible. So I think with the amount of time we have, especially in baseball, I think if we can expose our players over the course of 5 months, different day-to-days and different, hey, today we're going to go fastball machine, tomorrow we're going to use a curveball, the next day we might do a mix of both. Over the course of time, they'll be exposed to all of it, plus the games they play at night, every night. Bundle all that up over the course of a couple of years, you've exposed them to a lot of decision-making and mechanical adjustments that may be needed and some self-exploration and some guided coaching. And then that's the art of the whole thing, right? And that's kind of my challenge and my job. And how do you balance all those things? In our environment?
Do you ever get them to sort of like play competitive games against each other in order to dial up the pressure? Because it might not be that you can get enough variability from the pitch, but you might be able to get variability through the competitive pressure.
Of course, there's a myriad amount of games we can play. You break them up in teams. You split the group in half, and it's this competition, whether it's amount of hits or particular types of hits or situational type of hitting, regardless of the pitch side. But now it's just adding a stressor, adding a challenge, adding a consequence to try to replicate the pressure of a game that it might be. You can't replicate 50,000 fans in the World Series in a minor league field in the middle of Wisconsin. You just can't. So, I think the best practice design is one that either there's some sort of decision-making involved, some sort of speed variation in decision-making, and some sort of stressor or a challenge or a game-like competition within each other to create these different elements of a performance environment that you can in practice. And over the course of, like I said, if that changes day to day and there's a rhyme and reason to it based on the need of the team or the player, over the course of time it starts to play out. And I think that's where the discussion is like, hey, the immediacy of the performance may not be right now or whatever, but down the road it will play out. And that's just kind of that's called a process, and you trust it, and that's where you go for. And that's where this train ugly type of stuff comes into play. It may not look great today, but you're learning, and learning is never fun, and it is fun, but it can be very difficult and challenging, and that's kind of the point, right? And so I think to me, those are the best environments, the ones that are creating at least the perception of a game. Doesn't have to exactly replicate it all the time. I think that's where some coaches miss, like they have to replicate it exactly. Sometimes it's the perception of it. Like, to me, that's more important. I'm perceiving this to be tough, or I'm perceiving, oh my gosh, there's a challenge here, there's a consequence. That's similar to the game, you know?
Yeah.
I do think though there are some instances where we go too far, where we're creating challenges that don't replicate the game, whether it's a type of drill or it's like that's never going to happen. I saw something somewhere where we had this machine set up with balls coming out and 2 strobe lights next to it, and it's like, that's never going to happen, and I don't get that. Now we're just challenging and creating variability just to do it. Yeah. That's that fine line too. But I think it's got to relate to your sport pretty closely in some form of decision and speed and challenge and stressor. I think a nice combination of that would probably be the best. I think that probably for most sports. You probably know better than I would, but.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing, isn't there, in games that involve high visual acuity. I think people do start messing around with like visual, sort of blocking vision somehow. Like Nike brought out those glasses that acted like a strobe, so that you were a goalkeeper and you only got to see the ball. But I think they took it off the market because they basically got proved it doesn't really work.
Right. It doesn't happen. Right. It doesn't really happen that way. So it's interesting. but when it comes down to it, though, like how do you create those environments that best encourage some sort of decision or perception, or it's got to relate to the game somehow. More often than not, especially when you're not playing games every night. You have to.
One of the interesting things that I think that would be really interesting to kind of play around with, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, is so one of my early guests, in fact, he's coming to visit me later on this week, a guy called Kendall McQuaid, who's a golf coach. He's been very influenced by a famous American golf coach by the name of Fred Shoemaker, who's he's got a book called Extraordinary Golf, and he talks a lot about kind of almost like being inside the implement that you're using to strike the object. He's also been very influenced by a lady called Gabrielle Wolfe, who did a lot of research around where your focus of attention is, and a lot of her research suggests that having this external focus of attention is linked to performance as opposed to being like bodily focus, which I think so many of us tend to do. And you've mentioned a couple of times today about focus on the ball or focus on the bat and different things in between those two things. But what I'd be interested in just getting your views on is that one of the things Kendall talks about as a coach, he says, so golf coaches traditionally, they have to see where the ball goes, because basically they're diagnosing a swing fault by the flight of the ball. So if the ball curves in a certain direction or it moves in a certain flight pattern, there's usually some factors that you can basically, it's like a process of elimination. It's like being Columbo, but without that difficult of a mystery. And then what he says is that he doesn't do that. So he coaches without looking at where the ball goes. And he took a load of elite coaches and he took them through. They couldn't understand how he could coach. And the reason was, he said, I don't care. I don't need to know where the ball goes. The player will tell me. And they don't even need to tell me where the ball is, because I'm not interested in where the ball goes. I'm interested in what they tell me they feel, what their sensations are, what their experiences are. Do you guys do that kind of thing as well, where you're trying to get inside where the hitter is and how they feel and what they're experiencing?
Of course, you see it all the time. It's same type of environment. So say you're in a batting cage, right? And this is when it always gets to me. Is you have one coach in front of the hitter doing some sort of flip drill or he's throwing, and the hitter will crush a ball, right? Smack. Oh, nice swing. Next pitch. And he may take almost a very similar swing, and it just mishits it because it's a round ball and a round bat, and there's some variability to that. And it's like, oh, you did this wrong. Well, that was basically the same exact pitch and swing. It's just sometimes like, so what are you telling the hitter? Like, only if I have success, that means that's a good swing. Only when I have success and when I have a bad swing or not success, my swing is wrong. And that's the problem with those type of environments is player gets in the game, he gets out, there must be something wrong with my swing. Oh my gosh, let's go fix something mechanical. And now they lose complete focus on pitch coming in, pitch recognition. It's all internal focus on how's my swing, and they lose complete focus on what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And that coaching, the coaches who are able to like say, nice job, I don't care where the ball went. Hey, you popped that one up, you hit a ground ball or whatever it may be, but what we're working on right now, maybe your lower half, how your legs are working, there it was right there. I don't care what just happened. There it was. How'd that feel? Oh, I felt my back hip fire through. Oh, perfect. How did you tell yourself that? Oh, I just imagined myself, walking, bring my right leg across my left. That's what I thought I was going to do. There's a cue we can start using. Hey, bring your right leg through more. And that puts them in a position to let their lower half work better, regardless of where the ball went that particular, rep. Mm-hmm. It works out probably way better because now you're not focused on the external result, because if you start focusing on what the ball's doing all the time, and that you're telling the player, when you don't hit the ball right, there must be something wrong with your swing.
Yeah.
But in baseball, it's not usually the case. A lot of times it's the pitch you swung at, like what pitch you just swing at, and then sometimes it's round ball, round bat. Were you on time? Like you were a little late. Had nothing to do with your swing. You did a swing breakdown because you just weren't on time.
It's one of the problems with feedback, isn't it? Is that
yes.
We're a bit too quick to give it, and then all of a sudden we don't know what to say when it's not, when when the result isn't quite what we get a good result, yeah, brilliant, yeah, great, and then the result isn't quite there, but what do you do then? You just sort of say nothing, and then it's sort of an implied negative criticism. And so I think it's like, this is one of the reasons why, again, I've tried, and it's not very natural for me, but I've tried to become, far less vocal with feedback. I used to think it was really important, creates motivational climate and all that sort of stuff, but now it's much more about, I want the player to have space to be able to articulate their experience, what they feel, and self-correct.
Right, that's that intermittent feedback, right? It's behavior type stuff. It's it's calculated feedback, well-timed feedback. It's just knowing when to say something, when not to. I think one of the Twitter threads too was discussing like how one of my players did something that I never even imagined I'm talking about. He did it. It's like, that's the time to stay away. That's the time to not coach, and that's the time to stop blocking. Let that happen on its own. Yeah. And it's okay. Sometimes the best coach is the one who says less. It's not about what you say. It's sometimes about what you don't say at the right times, and that's hard. It's really hard, especially when you care. I mean, coaches, when you care so much, you want to help so much, and you just have to feel like you have to say something. And sometimes the best thing to do is just not say anything at all, and especially in sports to have so many variables to it. Is there ever the right thing to ever say? Like the exact right thing there it is. That's the right exact thing. And now my career's going to take off. Like, I don't know. It's interesting.
The problem is it's so unnatural for us, isn't it? Because, as coaches, we're born to help, aren't we? And so it's like I said this to somebody the other day, it's like the equivalent of seeing an old lady fall over in the street and not stopping to help.
right. Yeah. I know. It's interesting. But the feedback part of it and the internal, external focus research is interesting too. I think it depends on, in terms of block practice. So I think it depends. Like the research will say, block practice is less learning, more repetitive, rote learning type stuff. But I think if the block practice is done right and the athlete is really focused on the feeling of what he's trying to do, some learning can occur. I think it depends on how it's approached by both the coach and the player. Is it just to get through a bunch of drills, or is it, am I going slow enough and methodical enough to really, I'm engaged in this deliberately right now. In this block practice session, I actually did learn something. And now when I move it back into a more variable type practice, I can recall those feelings I had. But I just think it depends on the individual, So I hate to negate the block type practice and the cognitive type learning phase, if you will, of the real deep thinking, a lot of coaching, feeling, and slow it down. If it's done the right way and the mindsets are right, there's got to be value to that, right? There has to be. I just think it has to be done the right way. I think that the trap is keep going the same well, and all of a sudden you're not as intentful anymore because it's no longer new and novel, and now it becomes part of a just rote routine. That's where I think the problems come into play.
Well, this is where I talk about what I call this funnel of variability. So the skill, isn't it, is to get the right amount of variability. So if somebody has let's say a particular blockage in a movement, and actually you need to sort of get a movement sort of slightly better, there's a kind of inefficiency in movement that you need to sort of address. So the skill that they're trying to develop there, or in this case it's actually a technique because it's not necessarily connected to the outcome. The skill you're trying to develop there is actually the movement itself. It's a change of movement. And sometimes if you've got too much variability, too much chaos, you can't actually get that movement change where you want it to be. So you have to find the right amount of variability. What I'm interested in is, do you have to reduce all variability so that you do the equivalent of hitting the ball off a tee, just to rehearse a movement pattern, or and therefore develop automaticity, whereas someone like Keith Davies would say, actually, you don't want automatic. What you want is the ability to adapt to variables. So therefore, we're trying to find that tiny variable that's enough to still create the movement, but not so much that it overloads the system.
Yeah, that's the art of coaching, and I think that bases on the individual and where they're at, and are they even able to get to the point where we're trying to get to physically? You know, mobility and just flexibility. Can they even execute the movement that you're trying to get them to? I've seen it happen over the course of my career with players all the time, where whether they're young and they're not strong enough to get in their lower half yet to utilize their legs. They're just not strong enough yet to really hold a firm, strong position. Are they even ready for that yet? And then the more we continue to do things, like they just can't do it yet, and we just got to let that time progress where they're strong enough. Or do they have shoulder mobility issues where they can't throw from multiple angles from the infield, say? And that's the actual problem. It has nothing to do with like varying the type of ground ball. It's like they have a physical limitation. I think that identifying some of those things is important too, before we just throw this chaotic environment at them and like just figure it out. And you keep doing it, it's like over and over and over. They don't have a motor solution because they physically can't do it.
Yeah.
You know, or they just don't know where to go, because they've never had to make decisions, and that kind of goes back to the other conversation. So that's that the guided practice, the guided variability. Like to me, that's the art of coaching, and to me that takes practice too. And first, you got to be aware of the type of environment you're creating. Then you got to know that your athlete. It's like okay, and just know when to push and pull. And that to me, that's the art. That's the art, and there's no article, no book that can tell you exactly how to go about, like your test, right? Like there's no test that's going to say, oh, you got it now, you can go coach. Everybody, it's like, how do you continually adjust your strategies based on what you have in front of you?
Yeah,
that's the fun part of it.
Human beings, eh? You know,
they're weirdos, man. Human beings are crazy and weird.
Listen, Shaun, I'm really conscious that we were supposed to do this about 5 hours ago, and you've been very patient and kind of hung around for us to be able to make this recording as my day rapidly disintegrated in front of me. So I'm massively appreciative of your time for jumping on the call with me and having this great conversation. You're the first baseball coach on the Talent Equation, so you've got that accolade.
Thank you. I'm definitely not the best baseball coach out there. There's way smarter, but I appreciate you having me and at least giving our sport some exposure and a different insight on movement and skill acquisition and transfer and stuff. You can start seeing some very a lot of the commonalities and maybe a little bit some differences maybe here and there too. But these conversations are always great to get discussions going and ideas flowing, and I love it.
Great stuff. So if people want to kind of find out a bit more about what you're very active on Twitter and any more about your sort of philosophies and ideas, where can they find you on the old web?
Yeah, Twitter is at slarkin04. That's my Twitter handle, at slarkin04. I shoot some stuff out here and there, whether it's just regurgitated from somebody else or some just random thoughts I have, questions, and I always love interacting and getting these types of threads and discussions, and just looking for different ideas. I usually don't send out too much proprietary Dodger stuff because that's something there is a competitive advantage I do try to keep. But general concepts and ideas I love throwing around, and I love learning a lot of stuff from other sports too. I follow a lot of people from Europe and the UK, and a lot of great stuff. Coming up with a couple conferences. I think are you involved with one of them, the one in Ireland maybe?
Yeah, I'm hoping to go along. I'm not involved, but I'm hoping to go along. Yeah.
Yeah, and and that's gonna go in conjunction with the one that we're having here in Minnesota with Sean Mishka. So a lot of cool stuff coming up. Again, I enjoy the interactions. So check it out, and if I have something to say that you don't agree with, let me know, and we'll discuss it. I love it.
Brilliant stuff. Shaun, once again, thank you very much for your contribution to our little community here on the Talent Equation podcast, and all the best for the season coming up.
Thanks a lot, Stu. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to your future posts and guests. It's always great.